The commander said no powers in class. Then he watched the human transfer student hold her partner's arm and whisper, "Oops." What happened next made the entire Galactic Academy question everything they knew about human limitations. Stepping into commander Vex's classroom feels like walking into a gravity well. The dampening field hits your senses immediately, not like a barrier but like a heavy blanket pressing down on every synapse. Your telepathic range shrinks to zero. Energy projections fizzle before they can even form. That's the whole point. Galactic Academy's first and final rule: no powers in class. It's their great equalizer, the one policy that keeps 19 different species from turning tactical exercises into demolition derbies. I watched Commander Vex scan the room, his reptilian eyes pausing fractionally longer on the human. She stood there looking completely unremarkable. No bioluminescent patterns, no secondary limbs, not even particularly tall. Just a standard-issue human female in a standard-issue uniform. Her file said Emma Reeves. Her species designation read baseline human, the galaxy's weakest intelligent species. The file didn't say much else. Vex didn't waste time on introductions. "Find your stations," he said, his voice like gravel shifting. "Today we're discussing tactical responses to overwhelming force." The room went still. Every non-human in there knew what that meant. Their entire upbringing had prepared them for this moment. How do you win when you've already lost? How do you fight when the math says you shouldn't bother? You could see the tension in the way the Gullathan's scales tightened, the slight hum from the Voltarian's energy core as it tried and failed to spark. Standard protocols for standard species, but humans of course don't do standard. While the others shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the human transfer student just smiled. Not a boastful grin, not a nervous twitch. A calm, knowing smile, like she'd already heard the question and was amused by how late everyone else was to the answer. Vex noticed. Of course he noticed. His job was to notice things the sensors missed. But what could he do? She wasn't breaking any rules. The dampening field showed full saturation. No energy spikes, no neural activity outside baseline parameters. Just a human smiling at a question about certain defeat. The real test hadn't even started yet. The obstacle course waited, powered down and silent behind the shielded observation windows. The dampeners would remain active. The rules would be enforced. And yet somehow in that quiet moment before the lesson began, you could already feel the first crack in the Academy's perfect system. It wasn't in the tech. It wasn't in the rules. It was in the calm smile of the one species everybody had already written off. Commander Vex called on her first. Not the Gullathan with reinforced plating. Not the Voltarian who could theoretically overload systems. No, he went straight for the human. I saw his decision for what it was. Not random selection, but a deliberate test. He wanted to see how the weakest species thinks when facing certain death. The scenario displayed on the main viewer. A crippled frigate, life support failing, enemy battleships locking targeting solutions. Standard hopeless situation. Standard curriculum for how to die with dignity. Vex asked for solutions. The room stayed quiet, waiting. Then Emma spoke. She suggested ramming the dying ship into the enemy flagship. Not as a distraction, not as a last-ditch effort, as the primary strategy. The silence that followed wasn't thoughtful. It was horrified. You could see it in the way the Crystallon's crystalline structure momentarily clouded. The Gullathan's claws extending slightly. Wasteful, illogical, against every principle of tactical conservation. Then she explained. Not with pride, not with defiance, with the calm certainty of someone stating a basic fact. Fear's a weapon too, she said. Sometimes the best victory is making sure your enemy never wants to fight anyone like you ever again. The statement hung in the air like a bad smell. Psychological warfare wasn't new to galactic combat, but this was different. This wasn't about winning the battle. It was about winning the next 10 wars by making one sacrifice so brutal, nobody would dare provoke you again. Vex didn't even blink. He just made a note on his datapad and said flatly, "That's human." The phrase landed like a verdict. Part condemnation, part clinical observation. I watched the other students process it. The Gullathan Drathar stared at her like she'd just suggested breathing vacuum. His scales rippled in confusion. Was this insanity, or was it the kind of brutal clarity his own people had never considered? The lesson continued, but the damage was done. Emma's answer revealed a gap in galactic military philosophy so fundamental, It was almost embarrassing. Every species in that room had been trained to maximize efficiency, minimize losses, achieve objectives. None had been taught to weaponize their own destruction so completely that it became a deterrent. The human approach wasn't about surviving the impossible. It was about making sure nobody else tried to create impossible situations ever again. But talking about sacrifice is easy. The real test was waiting in the practical arena, where theory meets the unyielding reality of the dampening field and the obstacle course, where your body either performs or doesn't, where no amount of clever strategy matters if you can't clear the first hurdle. Vex dismissed the theory session early. The screens went dark. The real examination was about to begin. Vex paired them deliberately. Emma and Drathar, the human and the Galathan. It looked like a mismatch on the tactical screens. Her species known for endurance, his for raw strength. The obstacle course was designed just for this. A series of timed leaps, precision landings, coordinated maneuvers. The dampening field hummed at full strength. No telekinetic assists, no energy bursts, no enhanced musculature beyond biological baseline. Pure cooperation, raw, unaugmented skill. They started well enough. Drathar handled the weight-bearing sections, his thick limbs moving bulk with practiced efficiency. Emma matched his pace, her movements economical, almost minimal. They reached the first major hurdle, a wide chasm with shifting platforms. Standard Academy test. Requires perfect timing and trust. That's when she did it. Emma reached out and grabbed Drathar's forearm. Not a grip for balance, not a gesture of reassurance. Her fingers wrapped around his scaled wrist and held on. The contact was a violation, not of rules but of norms. Physical contact during graded exercises was borderline, unprofessional, unpredictable. Vex's voice cut through the training bay speakers. Miss Reeves, release your partner immediately. His tone was flat, but you could hear the edge. This was exactly the kind of undisciplined human behavior the Academy dreaded. She didn't let go. Just one more second, Commander, she said, her voice calm, almost absent, like she was concentrating on something else entirely. Then they jumped. Galathans aren't built for leaping. Their body mass, their bone density, their center of gravity. Everything about their physiology says powerlifter, not gymnast. They should have cleared the gap with brute force, maybe even clipped the edge of the platform. Instead, they moved like a single entity. Drathar's usually heavy, powerful form seemed to lighten. His trajectory wasn't an arc of muscle. It was a graceful, precise line. They landed on the smallest, most unstable platform in the center of the chasm. Perfect footing. Perfect balance. It was seamless, impossible. The sensors on Vex's console lit up. He checked the dampening field readout. Maximum suppression, active and stable. No energy spikes, no power signatures. The field was doing its job, which meant what we just saw shouldn't have been physically possible. The laws of motion, of mass and momentum, had just been quietly ignored. The entire class was silent. You could hear the low hum of the life support systems. Vex strode down from the observation deck, his boots echoing on the metal grating. He stopped in front of them, his gaze fixed on Emma. Explain. She just smiled. That same calm, infuriatingly mild smile from the classroom. She looked at her hand, still resting lightly on Drathar's arm, then back at Vex. Oops, she said. That single word hung in the air. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an admission of guilt. It was a statement, an event. A door swinging open onto something the Academy's entire rulebook had failed to anticipate. The classroom, the course, the entire concept of no powers. It all just tilted on its axis. Vex demanded answers. Not theories, not excuses. Cold, quantifiable data. He stood there with his datapad ready, his expression neutral but his eyes locked on Emma like targeting sensors. The obstacle course still hummed behind them. The platform where they'd made their impossible landing now perfectly still. The entire class watched. Nobody moved, Emma shrugged. Just a slight lift of her shoulders. It's natural human athleticism, Commander. Her voice stayed even, calm, too calm. Vex didn't buy it. You could see the disbelief in the way his grip tightened on the datapad. Humans aren't known for athleticism. They're known for endurance, for stubbornness, for surviving things that should kill them, not for defying physics in a full dampening field. Then she changed tactics. Not defensive, not evasive, just factual. I didn't enhance anything, she said. I didn't use a power. I just shared a little bit through contact. The words landed in the quiet room. Shared. Not projected. Not manipulated. Shared. The dampening field is designed to suppress active abilities. Telepathy requires focus. Energy projection requires intent. Force manipulation requires conscious direction. The field reads neural spikes, energy signatures, biological overrides. It's brilliant technology, but it has a blind spot. It can't stop what isn't actively being done. She called it kinetic resonance, a biological synchronization of bioelectric fields. Through skin contact, her nervous system temporarily harmonizes with another being's. She doesn't force their body to do anything. She doesn't add power or strength. She just optimizes. It's like tuning an instrument that's slightly out of key. The music was always there. She just helps it sound right. The effect is temporary, fades within seconds of breaking contact, doesn't require conscious control on her part. It's not something she does. It's something that happens when she touches someone. A passive transfer, a biological constant. The field doesn't stop it, for the same reason it doesn't stop your heart from beating. It's not an external application of force. It's an internal biological process that incidentally affects another organism through proximity and contact. Vex scanned her file again. His eyes stopped on a footnote from the director's initial assessment. One line easily missed. Effect increases with subject's understanding of target biology. The better she knows a species, the more effectively she can synchronize. It's not magic. It's empathy translated into physics. Understanding made manifest through touch. She hadn't broken the rule. The Academy's entire legal framework, their centuries of protocol, their non-negotiable commandment, it all assumed power was something you turned on and off. Something you aimed. Something you controlled. Her ability didn't fit the definition. It was always on. It didn't require control. It just was. The rule wasn't broken. It was obsolete. Vex looked from his data pad to Emma, then to the still active dampening field indicators. All green. All functioning perfectly. The system worked exactly as designed. It just wasn't designed for humans. The Academy's entire understanding of what constituted a power, what needed suppressing, what could be allowed, it didn't just have a flaw. It had a human-shaped hole in it, and Emma had just quietly stepped through. Director Quick sat at his desk, the glow of the terminal painting his features in pale blue light. Emma Reeves' file blinked on the screen. 3 weeks of data. He scrolled through it slowly, his expression tightening with each entry. The numbers didn't add up. They formed a pattern that shouldn't exist. In 21 standard days, she had established measurable biological synchronization with 17 different species. Not just casual contact, not just acclimation, bonding. The reports listed minor enhancements. A Voltarian's energy efficiency increased by 12% during shared tasks. A Golothan's reaction time sharpened. A Crystallon's structural stress fractures healing 40% faster than projected. She hadn't just integrated. She'd made herself indispensable. The cadets sought her out. Not for friendship. For optimization. The dampening field log showed full operational status. No breaches, no fluctuations. The system designed to prevent exactly this kind of cross-species ability transfer was functioning perfectly. And yet the evidence was undeniable. Her biometrics remained stable throughout, her own readings barely flickering. She wasn't exerting herself. She was just being nearby, touching someone, talking to them. Quicks called her to his office. No pleasantries. He pointed to the data on the screen. How are you bypassing the field? His voice was calm, but the question was an accusation. A demand for a technical explanation he could catalog and counter. Emma didn't look at the screen. She looked at him. I'm not bypassing anything, Director. The field works exactly as intended. She spoke with a patience that felt almost clinical. It suppresses directed energy. Conscious manipulation. My ability isn't either of those things. It's a passive biological emanation, a different frequency entirely. She explained it like she was describing a natural law, not a personal skill. Her body's bioelectric field naturally seeks harmony with others. It's a resonance. The better she understands a species' biology, the more precise the synchronization becomes. The dampening field was built to block a broadcast. Her ability was more like a quiet hum that gently tuned the instruments around her. The field wasn't faulty. It was designed for a different kind of noise. Quick sat back. The implications unfolded coldly in his mind. Humanity's infamous talent for rapid integration, for building alliances and communities across alien lines, wasn't just diplomacy. It wasn't just cultural flexibility. It was biological, a feature of their species baked into their very existence. They connected because on a fundamental level they couldn't help but synchronize. They made others better simply by being near them. It was the ultimate soft power, unavoidable, unstoppable. The protocols were broken, not because she broke them, but because they were never written to account for a species that weaponized empathy. Her stellar integration scores weren't an anomaly. They were a preview, a quiet, terrifying preview of how humanity was going to reshape galactic society, not through conquest but through cohesion. They didn't need to defeat you. They just needed to stand next to you long enough for you to realize you worked better with them around. And that realization was no longer theoretical. An alert chimed softly on Quix's console. A priority transmission. A diplomatic cruiser, the Harmony's voice, was reporting a catastrophic hull breach. Life support failing. Distress signal echoing across the void. The test wasn't in a classroom anymore. It was happening in real time, in the unforgiving vacuum of space. The data on his screen was about to meet reality. Emma explained it to Quix, not as a defense, not as a boast, just a statement of fact. Island humans are terrified, she said. The phrase hung between them. She meant Earth, a single planet isolated, thinking it was the only intelligent life in the universe for millennia, a species that built its entire mythology on being alone. Then first contact happened, the galaxy opened up, and humans discovered they were, by every measurable metric, the weakest, the slowest, the most fragile. Physical inferiority wasn't a theory. It was a galactic census fact. That's when the shift happened. Not a mutation, not an accident of evolution. A conscious decision. We had to adapt, she said, her voice devoid of pride. It was a simple, chilling assessment. They looked at their limitations and refused to accept them. Their evolution became intentional, a directed effort to become something more, not through gene splicing or cybernetics. Through mindset, through sheer stubborn will. She called it a refusal, a collective choice to matter. We believe in impossible things, she stated. We became something more. The words weren't poetic. They were a mission statement. This wasn't random biological drift. It was value-driven, inherently political. The galactic community operated on stability, on predictable growth, understood hierarchies, established norms. Humanity looked at those norms and saw a cage. Their greatest adaptation wasn't a new organ or a heightened sense. It was the capacity for controlled chaos, the ability to look at a rule and see not a boundary, but a suggestion to be creatively ignored. Their strength isn't in muscle density or energy output. It's in that belief, the unshakable conviction that they can matter, that they can change the outcome, that the impossible is just a problem waiting for the right kind of stubbornness. It's a terrifying form of power because it's invisible to sensors. You can't measure conviction on a bioscanner. You can't dampen a refusal to quit. Galactic society built its systems on the assumption that power is something you can see, quantify, and regulate. It never accounted for a species whose primary weapon is a shared delusion of significance, a collective agreement to rewrite reality through pure, unverified personal belief. They don't conquer. They connect. They synchronize. And in doing so, they make everyone around them more efficient, more focused, more alive. They turn weakness into a catalyst for communal strength. That belief was no longer theoretical. It was operational. The distress call from the Harmony's voice was still echoing. 23 lives hung in the balance, trapped in a dying ship. Standard protocols had already written them off. The math said it was a recovery mission, not a rescue. But math doesn't account for human belief. It doesn't factor in a species that sees a hopeless scenario and doesn't see an end, but a challenge. That belief was suiting up. It was heading for the airlock. It was about to meet the vacuum of space and see who blinked first. The diplomatic cruiser Harmony's voice drifted dead in the void, a silent, bleeding wound in its hull spewing atmosphere and debris. Life support readouts on the rescue shuttle showed 23 biosigns, most fading. Standard protocol called for a perimeter sweep. Recovery teams, a careful assessment of structural integrity, a slow, methodical process designed to minimize further loss, a process that would have taken too long. The math was already clear. This wasn't a rescue. It was a body retrieval. Emma and Lieutenant Ka didn't wait for the protocol. They suited up and launched. The hull breach was a jagged maw of twisted metal, still glowing with residual heat. They went in through the tear. No airlock, no safe passage, just a direct line into the dying heart of the ship. It was by every tactical manual a suicide run. The structural integrity was too compromised. One wrong move and the whole section could collapse. The conventional wisdom had already written off the crew. Conventional wisdom didn't account for a human. Inside was chaos, wreckage, the low moan of straining metal. A Voltarian officer was pinned under a collapsed conduit, his energy patterns flickering like a dying star. A crystalline diplomat was slumped against a wall, their crystalline form growing dull and cold, internal temperature plummeting. Ka moved to assess, his training taking over, but the beam was too heavy. The physics were absolute. Then Emma touched his shoulder. Just a gloved hand on his suit. "Lift it," she said, her voice calm through the comms. Ka braced himself, the powerful muscles in his arms and back straining against the impossible weight. And then something happened. Power flooded through him like he'd been struck by lightning. It wasn't his strength. It was something else. A surge of pure, optimized force. The beam moved. He lifted it. She moved through the wreckage like a medic, but without a medkit. Her hands found the injured. A touch on the Voltarian's chest plate. "You're okay. I've got you." His flickering energy sparks didn't just stabilize. They flared into a strong, steady lightning pattern under his skin. She knelt by the crystalline, her palm flat against their cooling surface. "Stay with me." "That's it, breathe." The internal temperature drop reversed. The dull sheen returned to a healthy, polished gleam. She didn't heal them. Not exactly. She synchronized with them, optimized their own failing biology. She gave their systems the clarity to fix themselves. One by one, she found them. A touch, a few quiet words, a transfer of quiet certainty. She enabled them to survive. She enabled Ka to perform feats of strength his species wasn't capable of alone. In a scenario where every piece of technology had failed, her biology became the only working tool. Commander Vex watched the live feed from the rescue shuttle, his face unreadable. He saw the impossible happen in real time. He saw the biosigns on his monitor one by one stop fading and strengthen. He saw the structural stress warnings on the Harmony's voice as Ka moved debris that should have triggered a catastrophic collapse. The laws of physics, biology, and standard procedure were not being broken. They were being politely, efficiently ignored. 23 survivors were brought aboard the shuttle. No losses, no critical injuries. Just 23 beings, stable and conscious, who by all rights should have been corpses. The mission was a total success, a statistical impossibility. The rescue shuttle docked. The bay doors closed. Vex stood there watching the readouts finalize. His entire understanding of capability, of limitation, of what was possible in this universe, shifted on its axis. It didn't break. It just recalibrated itself around a new human-shaped constant. Vex found her after the debrief. The main hangar was quiet. The only sound the distant hum of systems recycling air. The rescue shuttle sat dark and silent behind them, its hull still streaked with micro-abrasions from the debris field. He didn't approach her like a commander. He walked slowly, his usual rigid posture softened. The sternness was gone from his face, replaced by something quieter, more solemn. He stopped a few feet from her. For a moment, he just stood there. Then he spoke. "You saved my life," he said. The words were simple, flat, not an accolade, a statement of fact. All our lives. He didn't mean just the rescue team. He meant every life on that station that now looked at the future differently. Emma wiped a smudge of carbon scoring from her sleeve. She didn't look at him directly. "Just doing what anyone would do," she replied. It sounded like a reflex, a polite human deflection, the kind of thing you say when you don't want to be thanked. Vex shook his head. A sharp, firm motion. "No," he said. His voice held no room for argument. "What you would do. What humans do." The distinction was critical. He wasn't praising her personally. He was acknowledging her species, their specific, terrifying method of operation, their refusal to let physics or protocol dictate the outcome. He extended his hand. A human gesture, an offer, a test. Emma looked at it for a second, then took it. Their hands met. A formal, firm shake. The energy transfer wasn't dramatic. No visible spark, no audible hum, but you could see the effect on Vex. His shoulders, usually locked with tension, eased. His breathing, which had been shallow and controlled, deepened. A slight, almost imperceptible tremor ran through his arm and then vanished. It wasn't her enhancing him. It was something subtler. A synchronization, a harmonization of two biological systems finding a new stable equilibrium, a quiet understanding passing from her nervous system to his. A transfer of trust, an acceptance of method. In that moment, the Academy's foundational rule ceased to be a prohibition. The words "no powers in class" didn't change. Their meaning did. It was no longer an absolute ban. It became the opening position in a negotiation, the starting point for a conversation about how and when and under what precise conditions human capabilities could be integrated. They were real. They were usable. Most importantly, they were controllable, not by suppression but by mutual agreement, by trust. The handshake ended. Vex's hand dropped to his side. He didn't thank her again. He just nodded, a single, slow dip of his head. The message was clear. The method was accepted. The proof was in the 23 living beings currently in medbay, and in the new calm certainty in his own body. He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the vast space. The policy manuals, the tactical protocols, the entire legal framework of the Galactic Academy, they were already obsolete. They just didn't know it yet. The rewrite wouldn't start in a committee room. It started right there in the quiet hangar, sealed with a handshake and a transfer of silent biological trust. The work was just beginning. Director Quicks made the call. There was no committee meeting, no lengthy debate. The data was too clear, the evidence too overwhelming. He summoned Emma to his office. The space felt different now. The air hummed with unresolved energy, the silence heavy with the weight of a paradigm shifting. He didn't sit behind his desk. He stood before her, a being of contained light, his form flickering with the magnitude of the decision. "We will accommodate human abilities," he stated. The words were precise, deliberate, not an apology, not a welcome. A new operational fact, but you will help us understand them. The tension wasn't in the offer itself, but in the unspoken subtext. The era of suppression was over. It had ended in the wreckage of the Harmony's voice, sealed with a handshake in the hangar bay. This was the next phase, collaboration, a forced, necessary partnership with the unknown. Emma didn't smile. She nodded once, a sharp, accepting gesture. Then she added her own corollary. "We're not becoming something other than human," she said. Her voice was quiet but carried absolute conviction. "We're becoming more human." The distinction was critical. This wasn't a transformation into something alien. It was an intensification of their core identity. The galaxy had always defined them by their weakness, their limitations. She redefined them by their refusal to accept those limits. It was a fundamental shift in self-perception, and she was imposing it on the entire Academy. "I chose to matter," she continued, the statement simple and devastating. "I chose to be necessary." This was the terrifying truth Quicks's data couldn't quantify. Humanity's rapid evolution wasn't random mutation. It was a conscious, value-driven engine. They looked at a universe that told them they were insignificant, and collectively decided to rewrite the narrative. They framed their entire existence around acts of care and cooperation because conquest was a game for species that already had power. Humans started with nothing. Their only currency was connection. Their only weapon was making themselves needed. Galactic relations in that moment pivoted. The focus shifted from rigid rule enforcement to a messier, more dynamic process of shared growth. The goal was no longer to maintain a stable, predictable status quo. It was to manage a controlled, human-introduced chaos that produced previously impossible results. The Academy wasn't just admitting a new species. It was adopting a new philosophy, one where the definition of power expanded to include passive biological resonance, where victory could mean a mutually assured psychological deterrent, and where saving lives mattered more than following protocol. A new era began, not with a declaration of war or a signing of treaties, but with a quiet directive from a director's office, one that placed humans not as subjects to be monitored, but as partners to be understood. They had a seat at the table now. Their methods were valid. Their capabilities were real. The classroom, with its dampening field and its iron rule, would never be the same. The field would be recalibrated. The rules would be rewritten. The lessons would now include the terrifying, brilliant, and utterly illogical strategies of a species that had looked at impossibility and decided it was merely a suggestion. 3 months later, the Academy launched a new course. Not an elective, a core requirement. They called it Human Integration Studies. The title itself was a quiet revolution. It wasn't about containing humans. It was about understanding how to work with them. The curriculum was a direct result of the data from the Harmony's Voice incident, from the obstacle course, from 3 weeks of Emma Reeves quietly synchronizing with half the student body. The Academy had stopped trying to suppress what it couldn't understand and started trying to learn from it. Emma stood at the front of the new lecture hall as the teaching assistant. She didn't look any different. Same uniform, same calm expression, but her presence there was a statement. The institution that had tried to dampen her was now putting her in charge of explaining herself. The students watched her with a mix of curiosity and wariness. They'd all heard the stories. They'd seen the reports. Now they had to take a class on it. The final exam was simple on the surface, deceptively so. The instruction was a single line. Work with a human partner to accomplish an impossible task. No parameters. No defined objectives. Just an instruction that violated every principle of standardized testing. The tasks themselves were pulled from real scenarios the Academy had previously classified as unsolvable. Stabilize a core breach with inadequate coolant. Navigate a neutrino storm without sensors. Translate a dead language with no known route. I watched the exam play out across 19 different simulation bays. The results weren't just successful. They were uniformly successful. Every single student passed. Not a single failure. It was an unprecedented outcome. You could see the shift in the teams. It wasn't about the human doing the work. It was about the human partner creating a state of heightened synchronization. The Golathan's strength became precisely focused. The Voltarian's energy management became hyper-efficient. The Crystallon's structural analysis became intuitive. They didn't become super-powered. They became optimized. The impossible tasks became difficult but achievable puzzles. At the graduation ceremony, Commander Vex and Director Quix sat in the back row. They watched the cadets receive their credentials. The mood was different. A palpable energy of possibility. Quix spoke quietly, his voice barely a murmur. The galaxy would never be the same. It wasn't a prediction. It was an observation. A fact already in motion. Vex didn't look away from the stage. His reply was just as quiet, just as certain. When humans are involved, it never could. He'd seen the transformation from the inside. He'd felt the shift in his own biology during a handshake. He understood now that humanity's role wasn't participation. It was catalysis. They didn't just join systems. They accelerated them. They created new reactions. The resolution was in the data. New norms were already emerging from the success of the course. Cross-species engineering teams were reporting breakthroughs in materials science. Medical units were adopting touch-based stabilization techniques. Diplomatic corps were restructuring negotiation protocols to include human-style psychological deterrence. Human-aligned cooperation was no longer a theory. It was a proven operational doctrine. The classroom had been the testing ground. The galaxy was becoming the application. Emma's oops wasn't a slip. It wasn't an apology. It was a statement of strategy. I watched it happen. That single word, dropped into the tense silence of the training bay, changed the entire calculus of human interaction in the galaxy. Humans don't make mistakes like other species. When they say oops, what they mean is, I have just demonstrated that your rules do not apply to me, and I am being polite about it. It's a verbal shrug that carries the weight of a tectonic shift. They excel at these moments, especially when told something can't be done. It triggers something in them. Not defiance, not anger. A kind of calm, stubborn confidence that becomes their greatest strategic advantage. They look at a wall and don't see a barrier. They see a thing they haven't gotten past yet. This mindset, this relentless, quiet refusal to accept limitations is what makes them so dangerously effective. They weaponize their own supposed incompetence. In diplomacy, this looks like proposing solutions so outside the established norms that they force a complete recalibration of the discussion. In science, it's pursuing lines of inquiry everyone else abandoned as impossible. Not because they're geniuses, but because they're too stubborn to quit. In crisis response, it's the willingness to embrace controlled chaos, to ram the dying ship, to touch the alien's arm, because the standard protocols have already written off the outcome as a loss. They introduce variables the system isn't prepared for. They work within the rules by redefining what the rules actually are. Their power doesn't come from standing above others. It comes from lifting them up. The synchronization isn't a tool for personal glory. It's a method of elevation. They make the Golathan leap farther, the Voltarian think clearer, the Crystallon heal faster. They don't want to be the strongest in the room. They want to make the entire room stronger. This changes the narrative completely. It's not about conquest. It's about collaboration through forced beneficial entanglement. The change is messy, inevitably so. You can't introduce a catalyst into a stable system and expect a tidy result. The dampening field had to be recalibrated. The tactical manuals were rewritten. The entire philosophical foundation of the Academy's no powers rule had to be dismantled and reassembled around a new human-shaped cornerstone. It was administrative chaos, but it was a controlled chaos, a productive one. Humanity's collective refusal to accept the limits imposed upon them doesn't just bend reality, it reshapes it. They operate on a principle of persistent, low-grade rebellion that is so consistent it becomes a force of nature. The galaxy is learning, sometimes painfully, to expect the unexpected, to plan for the illogical, to factor in the human variable, the one that says, oops, and changes the gravitational constant of a situation through sheer, unassuming will. And it all started with one simple, quiet act of contact. A human girl, in a room full of aliens who thought they were her superiors, reaching out and holding her partner's arm. A gesture so small it was almost invisible. A violation of protocol so minor it was almost polite. Then she said the word. A single soft syllable that echoed through the halls of power and shook the foundations of galactic society. It wasn't an accident. It was the first move in a game nobody else knew they were playing. The Academy had a definition for power. It was narrow. It was overt. It was active. Telepathy that could be measured in neural spikes. Energy projection that registered on electromagnetic sensors. Force manipulation that distorted local gravity fields. Things you could see, quantify, and most importantly, suppress. Their entire system, the dampening field, the rules, the protocols, all of it was built around that one rigid idea. Power was something you did to the world, something you projected outward, something you controlled with conscious intent. Emma's ability didn't fit. It was the opposite, subtle, cooperative, passive. It operated on a wavelength their sensors weren't programmed to see. Their frameworks were built to detect a broadcast. Her ability was a quiet hum, a biological constant. It didn't break their systems. It just moved through them unnoticed. The dampening field was a wall designed to stop a charging beast. She was the gentle, persistent drip of water that eventually finds the crack and widens it. They called it kinetic resonance. The name itself sounds like a weapon. It isn't. It's a tool for connection, the most fundamental kind. It requires understanding, not just intellectual knowledge of alien biology, but a deeper, almost intuitive empathy. You have to understand how another being works, how their energy flows, where their natural rhythms are. To synchronize with them, it requires touch. Skin contact, the oldest, simplest form of communication. The Academy was prepared for mind readers and energy blasts. It wasn't prepared for a handshake. The resolution wasn't to ban the new thing. It was to understand it. The dampening field is still there. It still hums in every classroom. But now it's calibrated differently. Its sensors don't just look for spikes of active power. They monitor resonance. They map the subtle fluctuations of bioelectric harmony. Human abilities aren't suppressed anymore. They're mapped, understood, and integrated into the system. Studied, regulated, but not forbidden. The rule itself changed. The words on the placard might look the same, but the meaning shifted completely. It's no longer no powers in class. That was a blanket prohibition born of fear. The new rule is no uncontrolled powers. It's a distinction that sounds small but is profoundly different. It's a statement of trust. It acknowledges that ability exists on a spectrum, that the real danger isn't power itself but the lack of understanding and control around it. The Academy isn't in the business of suppression anymore. It's in the business of management. It learned that the hard way. It learned it from a human who held an alien's arm, said a single word, and quietly rewrote the definition of what was possible. The field still suppresses a raging fire, but now it knows to leave the candle flame alone. Emma Reeves arrived as just another transfer student. Unremarkable. Her file listed the basics: species, human, classification, baseline threat assessment, minimal. The Galactic Academy processed dozens like her every cycle. They came from species with measurable advantages: telepathic ranges, plasma generation, chitinous armor. Humans had none of that. Their designation as the weakest intelligent species wasn't an insult. It was a census fact. She didn't draw a second glance. That was the point. Her file said no notable abilities. The sensors confirmed it. Standard bioscans showed baseline physiology, no energy signatures, no neural activity outside normal parameters. The Academy's entire assessment system was built to detect overt power. Telepathy registers as a spike. Energy projection leaves a residue. Force manipulation distorts local physics. Humans don't operate on those frequencies. Their strengths don't show up on a scanner. They aren't things you can measure. They're things you have to experience. The real strength was always adaptability, belief, connection. A human's primary survival trait isn't a biological weapon, it's a psychological one. The stubborn refusal to accept a losing outcome. The capacity to look at an impossible scenario and see not a conclusion but a puzzle. Emma didn't walk into that classroom seeking power. She sought understanding. She wanted to know how other species worked, how they thought, how their biology functioned under stress. That curiosity, that drive to comprehend, was the engine of her ability. It wasn't something she turned on. It was how she was wired. Her unassuming appearance was her greatest camouflage. It allowed her to move through the Academy's rigid structure unnoticed. She didn't challenge the rules through loud defiance or flashy displays. She redefined them through quiet action. She didn't break the dampening field. She demonstrated that the field's definition of power was incomplete. She challenged the system by existing outside its narrow categories. The Academy watched her, of course. Their surveillance was constant, omnipresent. But they were watching for the wrong things. They were looking for energy surges and neural spikes. They weren't looking for a calm smile in a tactical discussion. They weren't looking for a hand on an arm during an agility test. They know what to look for now. The protocols have been updated. The sensors recalibrated. The entire definition of ability has been expanded to include passive biological resonance, kinetic synchronization, empathic optimization. They will never underestimate a human again. The cost of that lesson was a rewritten rulebook, a recalibrated dampening field, and a fundamental shift in galactic military doctrine. The Academy learned that the most dangerous thing in the universe isn't the species with the biggest weapon. It's the species you don't understand, the one that operates on principles your technology can't detect, the one that looks weak right up until the moment it says a single quiet word that changes everything. They will never hear the word oops again without a sudden sharp feeling of tactical reassessment. Galathans aren't built for leaping. Their entire physiology screams power, not precision. Thick, dense muscle mass, a low center of gravity, bone structure optimized for lifting and crushing. They're walking siege engines. The obstacle course wasn't designed for siege engines. It was a series of delicate timed maneuvers, gaps between platforms that required a specific kind of agility Drather simply didn't possess. He looked at the first wide chasm with the sort of resigned frustration you see in a master sculptor, handed a sledgehammer, and told to perform microsurgery. He was the wrong tool for the job. Emma's touch changed that. It wasn't a dramatic surge of energy. It was a quiet optimization, a biological tuning. He didn't feel stronger. He didn't feel faster. He felt balanced. For the first time in his life, his own immense strength felt like a precise instrument instead of a blunt weapon. His muscles, usually capable of only vast, powerful contractions, responded with a newfound finesse. They fired in perfect sequences, adjusting tension and release with a grace that was utterly alien to his species. It was like watching a master pianist's hand suddenly operate a bulldozer with the delicacy of a watchmaker. The leap itself defied physics only if you assumed Galathan biology was a fixed, immutable law. It wasn't defiance. It was better physics, a more complete understanding of the system. Emma's ability created a perfect synchronization of their bioelectric fields, a flawless energy transfer that didn't add anything new, It just removed the inefficiencies. It silenced the static in Drather's own nervous system, allowing his body to perform at its absolute theoretical peak, a peak his species rarely, if ever, reached on its own. It was the difference between an engine with gritty, misaligned parts and the same engine after a perfect tune-up. Drather passed the physical test. He cleared the gap with an ease that shocked everyone watching. But the real test, the Academy's entire examination of individual unaugmented capability, failed. It was revealed as a flawed metric. It assumed every species operated in isolation, that their baseline was a fixed point. Emma proved baseline was a suggestion, a starting point for synchronization. The test itself was the thing that changed in that moment. The goalpost didn't just move. The entire field of play was redrawn. Now the Academy doesn't just measure raw power or individual suppression. It measures synchronization. It charts the harmonic potential between species. It looks for the amplification that happens when biosystems resonate instead of resist. The curriculum, the assessments, the very definition of teamwork, all of it was rewritten to accommodate a new variable. A variable that wasn't a weapon or a shield, but a catalyst. And it all started with a simple, quiet act that broke no written rules. One human in a room humming with suppression tech, reaching out and holding her partner's arm. A gesture so small it was almost nothing. A touch that changed everything. The dampening field wasn't flawed. It was incomplete. I sat through the technical briefings. The engineers were proud of their work. It blocked everything they designed it to block. Telepathy flatlined. Energy projections fizzled at the emitter. Force manipulation distorted, then collapsed. It was a perfect system for the galaxy they thought they lived in. A galaxy where power was something you did. An action. A conscious application of force. It couldn't block passive biological resonance. The distinction is everything. The field suppresses action. It reads intent. It looks for the neural spike that says launch, the energy buildup that says fire. Emma's ability doesn't have that. It isn't something she does. It's something she is. Her bioelectric field hums at a constant frequency, a low-level emission that seeks harmony with other living systems. It's not a broadcast. It's a background state of being. The field was built to stop a shout. It doesn't register a quiet hum. That's why the sensors stayed green. That's why Commander Vex's console showed full suppression. The system worked. It just wasn't designed for a phenomenon that operated on the principle of being, not doing. Her ability to synchronize, to optimize another being's biology through touch, wasn't an illegal power use. It was a natural process like breathing or a heartbeat. The field doesn't stop your heart. It wasn't programmed to stop her resonance. The resolution was an update. The Academy didn't scrap the field. They made it smarter. The new calibration doesn't just look for spikes of active power. It monitors the resonance. It maps the subtle fluctuations of synchronized bioelectric fields. It learns the signature of human interaction. The goal shifted from suppression to regulation. It's the difference between banning fire and installing a smoke alarm. The field's primary function is still safety. It just has a more nuanced definition of what constitutes a threat. Human abilities are now mapped into the system, understood. Not as weapons to be feared, but as tools to be managed. Their kinetic resonance, their empathic optimization, it's all cataloged, its effects quantified. The rule evolved. The sign on the wall might still say no uncontrolled powers, but the meaning is different. It's a statement of management, not prohibition. It acknowledges that ability exists on a spectrum, and the real danger is ignorance, not the power itself. Safety remains. The field will still suppress a raging telepathic assault or a wild energy burst, but it won't interfere with a quiet handshake that makes a Golathan leap farther, or a touch that steadies a failing Voltarian's core. The system got smarter. It learned to tell the difference between a threat and a tool. It learned that the most powerful things in the universe aren't always the loudest. Sometimes they're the quietest, the ones that operate on a frequency of being, not doing. And sometimes all it takes to change everything is a system learning to listen for a new kind of hum. Emma Reeves didn't evolve by accident. The changes weren't random mutations or cosmic luck. She made a choice. A conscious, deliberate decision. I chose to matter, she told Director Quicks. I chose to be necessary. The words weren't a boast. They were a quiet declaration of intent, a statement of fact about her entire species. Humanity's rapid adaptation isn't a passive process. It's an active, intentional reshaping of their own identity. They looked at a galaxy that labeled them the weakest and decided to rewrite the label. This evolution isn't just about bodies, it's about mindsets. Souls. They are consciously choosing to become something more. Not through external augmentation, but through an internal, value-driven shift. They shape their environment not for conquest, but for collaborative flourishing. They build systems where cooperation isn't just beneficial, it's inevitable. Their approach is messy, unpredictable. It introduces chaos into stable systems, but it's also inevitable. Once a human decides to matter, the outcome is no longer a question of if, but how. Humans categorically refuse to be passive participants in their own destiny. They don't accept assigned roles. They don't obey limitations handed down by others. They actively, stubbornly, relentlessly redefine what's possible. They see a wall and find a way over, under, or through it. They see a rule and discover the loophole built into its very foundation. Their greatest strength is this persistent, low-grade rebellion against the status quo. It's not aggression. It's a refusal to accept a narrative of weakness. The galaxy is learning to accommodate this new variable. It has no other choice. The old models of stability and predictable power dynamics are breaking down under the weight of human insistence. Species and institutions face a simple ultimatum: adapt to the new reality of intentional human evolution or get left behind. The change isn't voluntary. It's forced by the sheer gravitational pull of human will. They don't ask for a seat at the table. They build a new table and invite everyone to sit down. Emma's personal choice to matter sent ripples far beyond the Academy's classrooms. It started a chain reaction. Her decision to synchronize, to optimize, to connect, it challenged the core assumptions of an entire interstellar society. The Academy was just the first domino. Her influence spread through diplomatic channels, scientific communities, military strategies. The galaxy is still learning how to process a species that defines power not as control over others, but as the capacity to elevate everyone. It all started with that simple, foundational choice, not a grand decree or a declared war, a quiet personal resolution made by one unassuming transfer student. The choice to matter, the choice to be necessary, the choice to look at a universe that said you are weak and respond with a calm, unshakable, watch me. That single decision, repeated across her entire species, became an unstoppable force. It rewrote textbooks. It recalibrated sensors. It changed the meaning of power. And it began not with a bang, but with a choice. A human choice. The most powerful force in the known universe. Emma designed the final exam. It was simple, almost deceptively so. The directive was a single line: accomplish an impossible task with a human partner. No parameters. No defined objectives. The students looked at it, then at each other. They thought it was a trick. A psychological test, a way to measure how they'd handle a no-win scenario. They were wrong. The tasks were genuinely, quantifiably impossible by the Academy's established standards. Things their textbooks and training modules explicitly stated could not be done. Each simulation bay presented a different nightmare. Stabilize a warp core breach with half the required coolant. Decode a transmission encrypted with a mathematically unsolvable algorithm. Navigate a sensor-blind asteroid field using only passive readings, scenarios that had been used for decades to teach cadets how to accept failure with grace. The Academy's entire philosophy was built on knowing your limits. This test was designed to make them ignore those limits completely. Then the human partners stepped in. Not to take over. Not to perform miracles alone. To synchronize. The change wasn't dramatic. A Galathan student paired with a human didn't suddenly gain new knowledge. His thought processes just became cleaner, more efficient. He saw patterns in the encryption that the computer had missed. A Voltarian, her hand resting on her partner's shoulder, managed the coolant flow with a precision her species wasn't capable of alone. Her energy didn't spike. It just became perfectly focused. It was cooperation, but amplified, elevated. It was belief made manifest. The human partners provided a quiet, steady confidence that the impossible was just a word. I watched the results come in. One by one, the simulation bays reported success. Not a single failure. Universal completion. Every student passed. The data was undeniable. The proof was on the screens, in the reports, in the stunned silence of the instructors watching from the observation deck. This wasn't a theoretical advantage anymore. It was a practical, repeatable, measurable fact. Human-aligned teamwork didn't just work. It shattered performance ceilings. The Academy finally had what it needed. Not anecdotal evidence from a single rescue mission. Not the controversial results of an obstacle course. Hard empirical data from a controlled standardized test. The numbers didn't lie. The integration wasn't a diplomatic gesture or a social experiment anymore. It was a tactical upgrade, a fundamental shift in operational capability. Human integration moved from the theoretical to the practical. It was no longer a question of if it could work, but how to implement it across the entire curriculum. The resistance crumbled. You can't argue with a perfect success rate. You can't dismiss a universal outcome. The proof was in the performance. The old way of thinking, individual achievement, suppressed abilities, accepted limitations, was finished. The new paradigm was collaboration, synchronization, and a stubborn human refusal to accept the word impossible. It's here to stay. The course isn't an elective. It's a core requirement. The methods are being written into new training manuals. The synchronization techniques are being studied, refined, and taught. The galaxy has a new tool. It's not a weapon. It's a partnership, a way to turn certain failure into universal success, all because one species looked at the impossible and decided it was just a suggestion. Emma's final statement to the director wasn't an argument. It was a declaration. "We're not becoming something other than human," she said, her voice calm, absolute. "We're becoming more human." The words landed with the weight of a closing argument. The galaxy had spent centuries defining humanity by its weaknesses, its soft skin, its slow reflexes, its lack of natural weapons. She redefined them by their one non-negotiable trait: the refusal to accept those weaknesses as permanent. Their evolution isn't a departure from their nature. It's the full, terrifying realization of it. This refusal doesn't manifest as aggression. It manifests as care, cooperation, connection. Their strategy isn't to dominate. It's to entangle. They lift others up. They make themselves necessary by making everyone around them better. A Voltarian thinks clearer. A Golathan moves with precision. A Crystallon heals faster. They don't seek to be the apex predator. They seek to be the keystone species, the one that holds the entire ecosystem together. Their strength is communal. Their power is distributed. Their victory is shared. Humanity's greatest evolution is this: becoming more themselves. Fully, completely, intentionally human. Embracing the very traits the galaxy saw as flaws and weaponizing them into strengths. Their empathy becomes a biological tool. Their stubbornness becomes a strategic advantage. Their need for connection becomes a force that synchronizes entire crews. They didn't change to fit the galaxy. They forced the galaxy to expand its definition of what a species could be to include them. The galaxy adapts to them because they adapt to it first on their own terms through a process of relentless, polite, and utterly unstoppable integration. They operate through controlled chaos, strategic oops moments. They introduce variables the system isn't prepared for, not to break it, but to force it to upgrade. They look at a perfect, stable, and ultimately stagnant structure, and introduce just enough friction to create a new, better equilibrium. It's not malicious. It's inevitable. It's how they are built. It all traces back to that first simple act. The unplanned test, one human girl in a room full of aliens reaching out and holding her partner's arm. A gesture of contact. A violation of protocol so minor it was almost polite. A physical connection that bypassed centuries of tactical doctrine and tech. Then the word, a single quiet syllable dropped into the silence. Not an apology, an event. Oops, that word changed everything. It wasn't a mistake. It was the first note of a new symphony, the first crack in a dam, the catalyst for a recalibration that would sweep from a single classroom to the highest levels of galactic command. It redefined power. It rewrote the rules. It proved that the most dangerous force in the universe isn't the one that shouts. It's the one that hums, the one that connects, the one that looks at impossibility, smiles, and then gently, quietly sinks with it until the impossible becomes just another task on the list. And it all started with a touch, and a word, and a refusal to accept that some things simply cannot be done. The galaxy learned one thing from Emma Reeves: never tell a human they can't. It's the one universal trigger. They don't get angry. They don't get defensive. They just get quietly, immovably stubborn. They'll look at your rule, your law, your unbreakable barrier, and they'll find the flaw in the premise. They'll say oops and then proceed to rewrite reality around your outdated assumptions. And the frustrating, terrifying, brilliant part is this: you will be better for it. Your systems will improve. Your understanding will deepen. Your limitations will expand. All because one human refused to accept them.